Hi, everyone. This is the SMC Journal podcast where we're talking about software engineering in today's IT, and that includes performance, security, observability, tuning, testing, monitoring, everything in between, and everything under the sun. Today's show is about monitoring, specifically real user monitoring and the front end of your website. So let me guess. You've probably got a website. Your company has a website. Their marketing department is probably pretty concentrated on making a great experience for end users. And some people know that if you have a shopping cart on your site, that the faster people can get to the shopping cart, the more conversions they have. So performance does make a difference. However, some people just go to their website, open up developer tools in Google Chrome and start looking at something called Lighthouse, and they get a score. Or sometimes they will go to gtmetrics.com or a webpagetest.org, and they'll look at these scores and they'll think, oh, well, here's all the things that I'm doing wrong. If I just correct this and get a perfect score, an A grade or a 100, whatever that top score is, then all of a sudden everything's going to be wonderful. And you need to fix every single thing that it says is wrong, or you're bad, you're doing things bad. Well, not necessarily so. It's contextual. And that's why we have people who know how to look at this stuff and say, this might be important to someone over here, but it's not necessarily important for your website. And that's really what we're going to talk about today, is how you look at this information and how it's gathered. One way is to just go on to webpagetest.org or analyze your site. We've actually done that on this podcast before for my own sites, for smcjournal.com and others. However, there's another way to get that information, which is through real user monitoring. And that's why I want to bring on Erwin Hofman, based out of the Netherlands and works for rumvision. He does this for a living. He analyzes your website and tells you, here's how you're putting the website together as it's displayed. Here's what's important to note about the performance of the site. Here's some things you might want to change, but here's some things that maybe your scorer is telling you is important that may not be as important to you as you think, and here's why. And I love having people like this. His posts are really great. I always share them when I can, but I was looking forward to talking to him. So let's bring on Erwin and talk about the importance of real user monitoring as it applies to the performance of anybody's website. Hello, Erwin. Welcome to the SMC Journal podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So I've been following you. I recognized your posts were on the top of my feed every time I would go into LinkedIn about 6 months ago. And I was like, these are really good posts where you're talking about core web vitals and front end web performance and all that stuff. And I'm like, who is this guy? And as I started reading the stuff, I was like, this is really good information. So I'm so happy to have you on the show today. I'd really like for you to introduce yourself and what you do to our audience.
All right. Who I am? Well, I once started as a developer back in 2001. And you could say, in a nutshell, I grew into being a consultant doing both audits and training sessions. But that's just a nutshell version. In the end, performance has a lot of niches, I would say. And my niche really is the performance part of performance, the front end part of performance.
So how did you get into doing the analysis of core web vitals and talking about the UX so much? Is this something that's fairly recent, or how long have you been doing it?
Well, yeah, I started as a developer back in 2001 and also started building my own custom content management system, CMS. And not because I was stubborn. I would say that era came a bit later as a developer, but I didn't hear of WordPress back then. So I started building my own CMS, and obviously I also did a lot of homework from A to Z, you could say. And at a certain moment, there were people telling me that was also valuable information, could be valuable information for other agencies. And that's when I started to share my knowledge, both using audits and training sessions.
When I started out, it was all about the back end performance and specifically under load, concurrency, making sure you didn't run out of resources on the infrastructure, things began to migrate to the cloud. Everybody said we've got unlimited resources in the cloud, but that didn't mean that it was an efficient application. So then the front end started becoming very important, especially for web applications. And then we saw Google Lighthouse, and we saw scores, and then we started getting into this. So I've noticed that trend, and now we've got a group of people who are really focused on the optimization of the front end. And I'm coming to a question here. We hear so much about the optimization of your website and how fast it is really affects conversions. It affects, how people are happy with your site. It can make you more money. I know you've got opinions about this. Would you like to talk about how, the importance or lack of a great score versus conversions and revenue generated?
Well, yeah. Do I have opinions? I'm not the person who's going to tell you that it's going to impact your conversion. It might, well, chances are it will, but the degree in which it will impact your conversion really depends on your niche as well, the rest of your website, obviously. I'm also not the person that's going to tell you that it's going to make a huge difference when it comes to SEO. Chances are it might be one of the least, maybe. I think Google even said that as well. You could say I'm really coming from a technical perspective. That's also the part, once again, still a developer actually. And that's also the part that I like the most, diving into, what your bottleneck is, and then shouting Eureka when I found the master issue, for example. And it's often a combination of low-hanging fruit, quick wins, and more time-consuming issues. So if you really want to know the impact on your business and conversion, I often say just delay your website. You just deliberately delay your website and you have a number. And I also get no merchant is going to do that. But that's the only way to know what the impact could be. Yeah.
Well, there are several ways that you can tell how your website's doing from the front end. I mean, you can manually go in and just open up DevTools and start looking through some of the tools that are there, look at some of the scores. But if you get 100 score on the Google Lighthouse, that doesn't necessarily mean that your site is completely awesome. That just means that you passed through that score, right? I mean, can you talk about how just getting a 100, that quote unquote perfect score, separate that from good performance and a good website?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Well, first of all, there are some parties that like to fake the score, so gaming the score, and as a result, you might not see the same in real user data. So you're basically only tricking yourselves or maybe your stakeholders. But in the end, and I can't emphasize this enough, Google will be looking at real user data, so-called field data. Unfortunately, they don't call it field data anymore, but it's really field data versus lab data. So Lighthouse web page test is synthetic testing, lab data, and the core web vitals and Chrome user experience report is field data. So you could game the score, but what I also think is interesting is Lighthouse is only testing the front-end performance. So if you systematically have time to first byte issues, backend performance issues, then Lighthouse won't take that into account. So you might think your Lighthouse score is good to go, but then in real life, if your time to first byte is lagging behind, then it will also directly impact FCP and also LCP, for example. And normally, I would say if your Lighthouse score is okay and your time to first byte generally is okay as well, you should do good in real life. It's often the case that your Lighthouse score is worse than real life experience. But even that depends on your audience and the type of devices and the internet connection that they typically have.
That brings me to my second question, or second point about this, which is the second way that you can find out about this information, which is real user monitoring RUM data. And I think you need some synthetic data from maybe scripts that do this, but you also need the RUM data from real users actually using the product. And I think you would agree. So tell me about how important real user monitoring is and about rumvision.
Yeah, they aren't really competing. You can use them both. And the way I like to describe them is Lab data is ideal, I would say, for technical stakeholders. And if you're a non-technical stakeholder, maybe a product owner or a CEO, then the field data is more important, because the field data really is telling you a story about the experience of real users out there, your very own audience. Lab data is convenient as well, but the field data is telling you that general devices, the devices that are most used by your audience, the type of internet connection that most users are experiencing when browsing around your website. So in the end, you should use both. Yeah.
So talk about rumvision and what they are capable of providing in terms of real user monitoring.
Yeah, Google is a good start already. When using Google, you get to see cool Web Vitals data, and with Google I mean the PageSpeed Insights test, for example. If you have a sufficient amount of visitors, you will already see real user data across 6 metrics. But when doing audits, I really missed nuance and deep dive. For example, and this might make sense, a unique visitor has a worse experience than during a successive page hit, because the random blocking CSS isn't cached yet. The domain and lookup has to happen, etc. Or someone coming from a Google ad or email campaign using query strings like UTM parameters, the typical Google click ID, Facebook click ID, and the URL. If your caching strategy isn't up to date, server-side caching strategy, then the page might not be fetched from cache, server-side cache, so it might then also take longer than expected. So those are already a few nuances that you don't get to see in the core Web Vitals data, because, Google is basically providing you with public data already, even data from competitors, but they aren't really saving all nuances and dimensions. Another dimension is the device memory. If you've got a low-end device, maybe 4 gigabytes CPU, then it has a harder job coping with the amount of JavaScript, for example, than when you're dealing with a 8 gigabyte device memory. So a very good example is, if you're planning to build a client-side application, then maybe you should know your audience beforehand, before choosing, to go with that stack. Once again, a lot of dimensions, and we've got about 35 dimensions in rumvision. That is enabling me to answer those questions, to tell me more about the audience without, needing to reach out to each of your visitors, for example. And I was really missing those dimensions and nuances when doing audits. So I started building it myself as just a tooling for myself, and then marketers joined as well. And it then became what it is today, a software as a solution.
I reached out to you because I was about to move over from one platform I was using to another, and I was actually noticing differences in the speed from a couple of just manual tests that I were doing and observing in dev tools. And I thought, there's got to be something strange going on. So I reached out to you and you said, hey, let's set up rumvision for a little bit. And we just didn't have a lot of time to go through and get a lot of data, but I wanted to bring up this page and let people see the kind of things that we got out of this. And maybe as I scroll through this, you can talk about what we're seeing here. So if somebody were to set up their site, and I think we were only monitoring a couple of pages, but we get the type of things that we would see in Lighthouse, but we get a lot more, right? So we're seeing time to first byte here. And if you want to walk me through anything, I'm happy to show it.
If you scroll to the top and then click the time first byte metric, then you get to see a lot of different metrics, and even additional metrics if you hover over one of them. I'm not sure if you're on a device.
I'm on an iPad, so
okay. Yeah, so then you have to hold the click event, but you can even see. Let's scroll to the bottom of this page.
Okay,
that might be a good example.
Okay, let's.
Because if you scroll to the bottom of the page, you would see the time first byte breakdown, and the time first byte exists of a lot of things happening under the hood. So in this case, the waiting time could be the result of a service worker that has to boot, for example, if you have a service worker. But it could also be a redirect when people are coming from a Google ad, because Google ad is throwing in a redirect themselves. You can't really do anything about that. But also the domain name lookup, a first-time visitor, well, a domain name lookup has always have to happen. And you can even see as a result if a bad time first byte is the result of a bad server response time or maybe a waiting time. And if it's the server response time, then you could dive into, well, the time first byte per country, for example, to see. I already checked this data as well. And I noticed that visitors coming from the Netherlands, the USA, typically have an optimal time first byte. But for example, visitors coming from India on your website have a worse time first byte. And then you know, okay, it could be a CDN issue or, well, whatever. So these are adding quite a few nuances to monitoring in general and enabling me or technical stakeholders to draw conclusions themselves and then know, well, yeah, where to invest time.
You see all kinds of websites out there. I see you posting a lot about all the different things that you see. But there's some commonalities. It seems like there's some very low-hanging fruit out there that kind of everybody misses. What are the most common things? Like if you had to advise somebody that's just coming to you and say, what are the first things I should check to make sure I don't miss the easy 101 stuff?
Oh, yeah. I would almost say it differs per platform. For example, in WordPress, WooCommerce, I typically see people starting to use critical CSS and then forgetting to also defer their jQuery file. So they managed to defer all CSS and JavaScript, except their jQuery file is still in the head undeferred. So as a result, you don't get any benefit out of applying critical CSS at all. In the typical single page application like React, people are, well, also using critical CSS, which could be a good strategy in that case because often the first page is the only hard navigation and then soft navigations will happen. But they often start to preload all assets. And, well, there is a saying, if everything is important, nothing is. So you might actually end up regressing the FCP because you are forcing the browser to spend time on specific homework, for example. And well, yeah, Magento is just shipping a lot of JavaScript in general. Yeah, that's just quite typical. But once again, each platform has their own typical HTML boilerplate, I would say. Another interesting thing I still see happening is using @import in your CSS file. It's often used with typekit fonts, but also still when using Google fonts. And it's often, once again, depends per platform, Laravel platforms or Magento platforms using specific plugins that would then use @import. And you then get a change request, and as a result, your CSS is delaying FCP, but then your CSS has to fetch the fonts, which is then yet again delaying FCP. So yeah, it results in a change request. So it really depends and differs per platform, actually.
So out of all the sites that you've worked on and all the clients that you've worked with, what's probably, and you don't have to say the company name, but what's probably the biggest difference you've seen pre and post? Like before, when they came to you, they were really in trouble and you made these changes and the kind of results that you're seeing by optimizing the site.
So the question is,
what was one of the biggest transformations you've seen positive from the clients you've worked with?
The biggest ones came with the, I would say, most foolish mistakes, like keeping your A/B testing while not actively using it anymore. But then, yeah, it's often a case of misimplementation, I would say. So implementing A/B testing in such a way that it wasn't even good, even if they would still actively use Google. Well, yeah, you could use Google Optimize, but it's sunset now. of soon will be, but A/B testing in general. There are some interesting nuances when it comes to A/B testing. I also wrote an article about this. People often think JavaScript is harmful for performance, so A/B testing, client-side A/B testing, apparently likely is harmful as well. So we should move it to the end of our head section in the HTML source code. But that actually is what you should not do. It should actually be, especially if you're using a hiding snippet, it should go at the start of your head section, at least above any other CSS or JavaScript files. Because otherwise, the browser first has to fight its way through all other resources and maybe inline CSS and JavaScript, then reaches your A/B testing, then is being told by an inline snippet that it should hide the page until A/B testing is done. So the timer, the hiding timer, you could say, only starts after the browser fought its way through all other resources. While if you would do it the other way around, A/B testing at the top of your head section, meanwhile, while hiding the page, it could work on all those other resources, and it's then doing multiple things at the same time. But that's already a deep dive into, well, one of the nuances. But I would say that was one of the, I've done this and seen this multiple times, getting rid of A/B testing, or if still being used, implementing it in a more optimal way. And that often comes with the biggest visual perceived performance win.
So if somebody's watching this and says, you know what, I really need to add Rum to what I'm doing because I'm not, and I need to know how to start. It seems like rumvision would be a very easy way to get started on this. Can you tell me how can somebody jump into using rumvision if they wanted to do that today? How would they start?
Well, it's already an active software as a solution today. So yeah, you could basically go to rumvision.com, and there should be a button at the top right where you go to the application. And over there, you can register and then grab the snippet right away. And you could embed the snippet using either a Google Tag Manager or Adobe Tag Manager, or putting it right into your source code.
So this is just pasting in a little bit of JavaScript and you're good to go, right?
Yeah, basically the same like you would embed Facebook Pixel or Hotjar. So it's basically another, you could say another third party, with the difference that we try to keep the impact to a minimum. As a matter of fact, you won't even see an impact because, well, we are here for performance. So it would be a bit weird if we would be impacting performance at the same time. But it's as easy as any other third party. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, we'll make sure that we have links to rumvision and some of the things that we talked about in the YouTube video text, as well as on smcjournal.com. Anything else that you wanted to make sure that we covered or mentioned about Rum, or about maybe some final words of advice of somebody who's just now discovering that there's some dev tools out there that they can look at to find out how their website's performing? Like any just basic advice for them?
I'm afraid if you would just start about now, that it might be a bit intimidating with all the tools out there. So yeah, if I would need to give an advice, I would say, yeah, Lighthouse comes with a lot of nuances, and I'm not sure if I have the time, but I'm going to give one example. Lighthouse might try to believe you that you should implement WebP images because compared to JPEG images or PNG images, WebP tend to be tend to have a smaller file size. But it once again, it really depends on your audience, which is why RUM data is important. For example, if you've got an audience in the Netherlands, Belgium, maybe Scandinavia, then you won't see any wins from WebP if you did all the other things okay and right already. But if you've got an audience in the South of America, South of Africa, and most other countries as well, you might actually see a win from implementing WebP, because there the challenges are more versatile, I would say. It's both the devices that people are using, but also the internet speed. And in the Netherlands, it's typically only the devices, for example. The internet speed isn't really a challenge here because the Netherlands, Belgium are small countries. Internet coverage is quite good, and the general average internet speed is also very good. So Lighthouse might be a bit tricky and coming with quite some nuances when it comes to interpreting Lighthouse. So I would say web page test is a good start. When it comes to lab data testing, synthetic testing, and well, obviously we are here. Rumvision is here for the run data, the more nuanced run data, even if your site doesn't have a sufficient amount of visitors yet to get call by FIDOS data.
Interesting. I actually had looked at one of my scores and it was saying, you need to change your images to WebP. And I'm like, I don't know if that's actually the case. And so it's all contextual, how much weight you put on that versus what Lighthouse puts on it. So that's a great point. So wonderful. I wish we could dive in and talk more. So maybe that's a cue that you need to come back on the show and we'll talk about some of these specific things and you can dive in closer and maybe we can even use some examples. Obviously not going to use my site because I don't want you probing too deep into my secrets there. But no, I'm just kidding. That would be great to have you back. So thank you for being on the show today, Erwin.
Yes, thank you.
With anything, whether it's your Lighthouse score, the performance of your application, how your backend performs under load, it's all contextual. And this interview kind of brings focus to me that performance in whatever realm, front end, back end, whatever, is still such a niche skill set. If somebody who looks at the loading of that page, maybe it's somebody who is a developer, but they look at the score, they understand some of it, they just want to get it out the door with as perfect a score as they can. But then you have a real performance engineer with that niche who understands that, says, well, hold on just a second. I think we're always going to need those people in the industry, and I wish that we had more of them. But what do you think? So I can be reached on several different social media platforms, including LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, and others. And that QR code will take you to a bio page where all of my links are at. I'm really easy to find. And if you can't figure out any other way, just shoot me an email to my new email address, heyscott@smcjournal.com. If you like this content, you can always see new episodes come up if you'll subscribe to the channel and ring the bell. It'd be great if you put a like on this video to let me know that I'm doing a good job, or just scan the QR code. It'll take you right there and you can do it. I look forward to hearing from you. What do you think about real user monitoring? Are you using it? What kind of data are you getting? As you can see, I'm monitoring my websites and I hope to make them better each and every day if I can. And I'm using it in a contextual way. I hope you will too. For this episode of the SMC Journal podcast, I thank you for watching. We'll see you next time. Bye.